Is up, everybody? It is your host, Chef Jeff Fell, and we are here on the Weekly Harvest with me, Frank Perry, Chief Procurement Officer at Get Fresh. Frank, what do you want to talk about this week? You got a pretty interesting topic.
So I thought that I got a lot of good feedback when we were talking about tomatoes and outside of its refrigerator, putting them on the counter, and then we started to talk about how certain fruits and vegetables emit ethylene. So then more and more people started to ask questions about that kind of topic and where else do I store things incorrectly right now?
All right.
So, I wanted to first kind of, touch base on ethylene in itself. So why is it used? Well, the first thing is it's used for the purpose of jump starting the ripening process of certain fruits and vegetables. What ethylene is, it's a natural occurring gas that's giving off by the ripening fruit. Okay, so ethylene can also have a adverse action to it too. So what it can do though is prematurely age sensitive vegetables. So that's why it's extremely important when you are storing product either in the refrigerator or on your countertop that you separate ethylene producing fruits from vegetables whenever possible. So
which fruits, which vegetables first emit those kind of gases? So people kind of have let's build a structure here of what emits and then go into kind of what that affects. And then we'll talk about potentially that storage structure, because I've seen a few interesting things on folks' counters, and not myths, but the banana hanger up top and stuff like that, and what your thoughts are. So first, what emits and what is it bad for?
Yeah, so I'll give you a handful of items that commonly, that people commonly have at their household that do emit ethylene gas. So apples, bananas, kiwis, a bunch of different stone fruit from nectarines, peaches, plums, apricots, avocados, honeydews, mangoes, pears, and of course tomatoes. So these are ones that have ethylene because, again, think of all of them. They have a ripening stage to them. So it's important that, again, these are the ones that emit ethylene. So if you do have them on your counter or you do have them in your refrigerator, you now have to be conscientious of what other stuff are sensitive to it and keep them either on different shelves or different parts of your counter. So the sensitive items now that are sensitive to ethylene gas will be broccoli, carrots, eggplants, all different types of lettuces, potatoes, asparagus, cucumbers, cauliflower, watermelon. Those are the ones, again, you have to really watch where you are storing them, either, like I said, either on your counter or inside of your refrigerator.
Yeah. So I think that, when you're talking about, from a commercial standpoint, I just think it's really cool to maybe touch on like what you guys have there over at Get Fresh with like the ripening room and how that kind of plays into effect with kind of commercial.
Yeah, so in our warehouse, we actually have in each one of our coolers, we have what we call an ethylene scrubber. So what an ethylene scrubber is going to do is going to actually now pull the ethylene out of the air so it doesn't now ripen other commodities that are all within the same cooler. So our coolers are all temperature based and based on then the commodities that have to, again, be stored in a certain temperature for the extension of its shelf life. So the problem is with that is that you will have commodities like tomatoes and bananas and other ones that are going to be within the same cooler because of their temperature zones. But again, some will emit ethylene and some are going to be sensitive to it. So our ethylene scrubbers will go ahead and pull that out of the air to go ahead and not cause commodities within reach to be ripening too fast. Now, we don't have that in our house. I don't think any restaurant has that in their coolers either. So that's why it's important to be able to make sure that you are separating things. I have looked at, early days as a Get Fresh employee, I used to be a driver. So I would go into these coolers. And it is amazing sometimes that even in some of these restaurants, they don't even separate them too much inside of their coolers. So then you will start to have stuff broken down. Now, you and I don't have massive coolers in our house. So again, it's just being more conscientious as to where things are being stored on shelves or in drawers or, again, somewhere on your counter too.
Yeah, so before we jump more into potentially some of that storage for some of the, your household stuff, a little trick though for people, let's say you do need to ripen stuff faster, most people have bananas in their house, but a lot of times avocados come in as rocks. They're not at a turning point where they're ready to go. Sometimes you'll get lucky. So a little trick is you can actually take some of those ethylene producing produce. If you have a paper bag or something that can kind of allow some gas out, you don't want airtight seal like it. So a paper bag is great. Throw in like a banana or two in there, put those avocados in there and kind of just crinkle it up. And those gases will actually speed up that ripening process. So that way you can use some of those produce quicker if they're at an earlier stage. So rather than just waiting for them naturally to go, that will kind of speed up that process. So that's a little trick that we use sometimes in the kitchens. And I know I've done it at home where I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to make some guac, or I want my tomatoes to be a little bit juicier and not as firm, and we'll just throw them in a bag with a couple bananas, and you'd be surprised within a day, maybe even two, depending on where those bananas are, how fast they'll start to actually turn over. So how else should folks at home store other things? I know you got a tip with things like asparagus, even herbs. I know a lot of people will just take those things and just throw them right into their crisper in their fridge, and maybe talk about too the crisper of a fridge and kind of what its role
starting
is.
with where to store stuff. So again, not a lot of us may have a lot of counter space in our kitchen, but there is probably about a good handful, half dozen items that you would prefer to store in your counter versus in the refrigerator. So I know on previous episodes we talked about tomatoes being stored on your counter. Avocados is another one, bananas, mangoes, oranges, pears, melons. Those are all kiwis. Those are all good items to keep on your counter. That's going to help it to ripen and not be stuck inside of a 34, 36 degree refrigerator. In the refrigerator, now you're going to want to have apples, asparagus, beans, broccoli, Brussels, lemons, berries, all that kind of stuff. Again, you're going to want to be very conscientious of exactly where you're storing them too, because you're going to have some of those fruits and vegetables that are going to be emit ethylene that you're going to be inside the refrigerator alongside of stuff that will be sensitive to it. So you still got to be watch out what you're doing when it comes to that part. I know sometimes there's a lot of people that actually put potatoes and onions and garlic and sweet potatoes or squashes inside of your refrigerator. Another one of those handful of items that you do want to store now in your pantry in a cool, dry, dark place. I know in a lot of restaurants, they do have a section that is kind of separate of their kitchen that we go ahead and drop off all of those kind of commodities and let it sit outside. So just another one of those little helpful tips on where to store some of those produce things. But going a little bit deeper into some kind of fun little tips when you're storing produce in your fridge. So asparagus is a good one. What I generally do is when I get it from the grocery store, I'll cut the bottom portion of it, maybe like about a couple inches or something off of it. And then what I'll do is then I'll put it in about an inch of water and let it stand upright. This will keep it fresh it could be in there for probably over a week. But that's a good, helpful tip, because some people will just go ahead and leave it in this plastic bag on its side and just let it sit there, but it's going to dry out real fast, turn all wrinkly. So it's important to go ahead and like I said, put it back into about an inch of water so it can keep itself hydrated and fresh. Another fun little one is mushrooms, storing mushrooms inside of a paper bag. That's another good thing to kind of keep the shelf life and keep it long inside your refrigerator. Corn is another one of those. Whatever you do when you have corn, do not take it out of its husk. Keep it in its husk, because the second you take it out of it, it will dry out much faster. Herbs, again, one of those where you just, you kind of keep them in a jar if you can, keep them kind of stood up a little bit right, or you cover them loosely in a plastic bag. Try to keep it away from any of your little blower vents that are sitting in the back part of your refrigerator. Keep them a little bit further out in front of it, though. The crisper drawer, that's a fun one. So there are some refrigerators will have two drawers. And if they do, the best thing to kind of set them up is having one that's kind of a high humidity crisper drawer and one being a low humidity crisper drawer. So with the high one, what you're going to want to do is you're going to store vegetables that are basically going to have thin skinned, or they're going to be prone to wilting. So beans, broccoli, carrots, cauliflower, cucumbers, peppers, and any kind of leafy greens. You want that in a high humidity crisper drawer. The low humidity one is going to be ones that are going to be, you're going to store fruits that release the ethylene gas that are going to be prone to rotting. So you would put inside of that drawer apples, you would put ripe mangoes or ripe pears or ripe stone fruit. So even though you're storing them originally on your counter, once they hit a ripening stage, you're going to want to then take them off that cooler and put them inside of your refrigerator. Again, you don't want to keep it in there for too long because then it might start to turn a little bit on the black on the inside. But just if you needed to, you throw them inside of your cooler after they're ripened. So yeah, those are some fun little tidbits when it comes to where to store all of your produce in your house, counters, refrigerator. I know you mentioned this before too about stuff that you would throw inside of a freezer. I know grapes are a good one to go ahead and throw inside of a freezer. Bananas are a good one too that you can go ahead and throw in a freezer, and you can use that for baking. And any kind of like little, if you're cutting up fruits and vegetables, like frozen storm fruit for like peaches or nectarines, frozen vegetables or scraps from like vegetables. Those are all good things you can go ahead and throw inside of a freezer and then take them out for future use. Use them for broth, use them for any kind of other, meals that you're making later on.
Yeah, there's so many ways to utilize product, even if after it's turned its ripening stage. I know in our household, a lot of times what we'll do with fruit, if it's left over, keyword if, is we'll cut it up and then we'll freeze it and we'll make smoothies out of it. Or if I'm making like a berry sauce or something that I can cook it down. So rather than just throwing it away, which most people do, is they just tend to just want to toss it, is just save those things, freeze them, and then even your scraps and stuff for now, if you're into that, you can compost that later. If you needed to, you could take that, put it into your garden or get your soil ready with some of that. One that I found too, like you mentioned, that sometimes counter space can be a real tough issue with like herbs, is get a damp paper towel and put it in, take it out of the bag that you get it at the grocery store, because those really kind of cling and create unnecessary moisture that you don't want on your produce. And I found that there's sometimes I've forgotten and just thrown it from the bag right in, and you'll notice in a day or two, those things are, they're basically turned into mush because there's so much moisture. But if you take a little paper towel and you just barely get it damp, wring it out, and then wrap your herbs in that, and then put it in a baggie, like a Ziploc type bag, and just leave it vented a little bit. Don't zip it all the way closed. That'll actually help preserve too, because it kind of mimics that putting in water. It's giving it just enough moisture that it'll keep it fresher. So lots of tips on how to store today. So if there's, again, any other produce that you, or fruit, vegetable that you want to know more about in detail about storage, we're going to, in future episodes, I think we're gonna migrate into my kitchen at some point, I think, and do some cutting and actually showing of stuff, so those that are watching can see maybe some techniques that go along with this, these topics that we talk about all the time. So be on the lookout for that. But in the meantime, if there is things you want to know about, again, just shoot us an email at the Fell Into Food, or you can reach out directly to Frank or myself, and we'd be happy to talk about those. So anything else in the markets this week that we need to know about, Frank?
The transitioning of a lot of different commodities still. There was a big push for pineapples, going into Easter. So, I talked to a bunch of different pineapple growers a week ago when I was out at a food show. Again, they sold about twice as much as they normally would. So there's going to be gaps and stuff. You probably won't see scarcity of it inside the grocery store, but you will probably see elevated prices. So you're going to see that when it comes to grapes are still in the same boat that we talked about. Pineapples are another one that's going to be hitting the market where it's going to be a little bit more on the pricier side. So other than that, yeah, everything is pretty good across the board then.
All right. That's all we got for this week. Until next time, we'll catch you on the sunny side.